Welcome back. Last week we talked about the Mughal Empire being the most successful nation state in the world in 1700, and the richest, most prosperous, the nation state that was closest to industrialization of any nation state in the world, even closer than China was, or some of the nation states in Western Europe. France was at its height then under Louis XIV, the Sun King. Mughal Empire is further along than they are. I get asked often, why did the Mughal Empire never colonize any other place? They didn't need to. They had just about everything they needed in India. They were at the crossroads of trade routes. They were incredibly successful economically. In fact, 1686, the date we're starting this lesson in about the East India Company, Emperor Aurangzeb said to an East India Company official, "You have nothing you can teach us, you have nothing you can give us. Basically, we have everything here." Bit of an arrogant view, but could be understood given the relative difference in wealth between India at the time and Britain. So Aurangzeb dies in 1707, and what happens after that is still the debate among historians. There is no unified, conclusive theory as to why the British conquered India, even how they conquered India. There are different theories. There are historians that have different interpretations. One historian who's written an outstanding book on this, which I think most of you have probably seen, many of you have probably read. It's actually recommended by President Obama as one of his best books of 2019. The Anarchy, by the Scottish historian William Dalrymple, talks about the East India Company, corporate violence, and the pillage of an empire. How the East India Company took over the Mughal Empire in the 1700s, and effectively makes the case that these were a bunch of non-threatening English traders in the eyes of the Mughal emperors, which we've sort of talked about last week. But in time, they came to usurp the Mughal state. How does that happen? Let's have a quick lesson about the East India Company in this time period. So one theory is, had Aurangzeb been succeeded by stronger leaders of the Mughal Empire, the British never would have gotten more than the little foothold they had in India. The reality is this: Aurangzeb lived to be 88. He outlived his sons. There was no real succession in place. He had stretched the empire to its limit. Not only did it stretch from north of Kabul all the way through the Indian subcontinent and all the way east to the extremes of Bengal, to the extreme eastern portion of Bengal, it had been stretched despite being super rich. Economically, there were rebellions, there were obviously Europeans sniffing at the heels also. There was a regency of several younger emperors that were cycled through between 1707 and 1719. The Said brothers were the influence, kind of the Machiavellis of the Mughal throne in that period, and they dictated affairs of state, and the empire weakened pretty considerably. Muhammad Shah takes over in 1719. He gets rid of the Said brothers, but still, Mughal state is getting weaker. 1739, this man, Nadir Shah, sacks Delhi. The Persians under him annex everything west of the Indus River. So at this point, Afghanistan, which is the ancestral homeland of the Mughals, is no longer attached to the Indian subcontinent in a nation state, and would never be again. Delhi is looted, the Peacock throne is taken back to Persia, and the Mughal state is incredibly weak. At the same time, the French are beginning to colonize settlements on the coast in India, most notably Puducherry, or Pondicherry as it was known, which is in Tamil Nadu, or the Tamil Nadu region. It's a union territory now, but it's a little bit south of Chennai. The French, by 1748, the end of the War of Austrian Succession, have more revenue, or about the same amount of revenue, coming out of their colonies in India as the East India Company does, the British East India Company. Amazingly, given the fact that the British were messing around in India starting in the late 1500s, the French just arrived in the 1720s, basically, and already they have as much going on for them in the Indian subcontinent. Also needs to be noted, the French had a historic alliance with the Ottoman Empire, which made Muslim princes, including the Mughals, more comfortable with the French. The French, despite being a state at the time with no separation of church and state, right? The Catholic Church really ran France in many, many ways up until the French Revolution. They had aligned with the leading Muslim power of the day, the Ottoman Empire, the leading Muslim power in Europe. The leading Muslim power globally was the Mughal Empire. And so there's a greater comfort with the French. The English East India Company, by this time the British East India Company, after the Act of Union of 1707, they are looking to work with the Mughal ruler, and they derive their legitimacy from the Mughal ruler. This is a very important concept, as India never quite gets conquered in the same way other colonies do by the British. The British always were either working on behalf of the titular ruler, who was the Mughal emperor, or later had created their own nation state, the British Raj, we call it, the Indian Empire, as it was officially known, who just happened to have the same head of state as the United Kingdom, right? It wasn't. It was Queen Victoria. It was King Edward, but it was not governed as a colony per se ever. And that's, I think, a misconception a lot of people have. India was a British colony in actuality, but it was not governed the same way Kenya was governed, or Canada was governed, or well, Canada became a dominion, so that's a bad example. But the same way Kenya was governed, or Malaysia was governed, or Fiji was governed, or any number of other British colonies. So the authority always came from the Mughal crown. The East India Company becomes the tax collector for the Mughal Empire in the 1750s. And look, the Portuguese had conquered a lot of the Indian coastal towns with colonies, and then there were states that were aligned with the Portuguese, and this included a lot of the Muslim rulers in the Deccan, in Gujarat, where the Portuguese had first arrived in the late 1400s, and Bengal. Bengal is the key. We're going to talk about Bengal a little more in a minute. This is Clive of India, Robert Clive, who was the Governor General for the East India Company based in Madras, Fort St. George. 1756, the 7 Years' War between France and Britain and their associated allies breaks out. We call it the French and Indian War here in the United States, or here in North America. Clive is put on notice, okay? There are going to be problems in Bengal, because what happened in Bengal is the Nawab of Bengal, who was a nominal governor of the province for the Mughal Empire, but in reality was a sovereign, right? Ruled Bengal and paid allegiance each year in tribute to the Mughal Emperor. They had made a peace with France. They had said to France and Britain, butt out at the beginning of the war. We don't want fighting in Bengal. The French put up their hands and say, okay, under your authority, we will not engage in battle. But the British refuse. So Fort William, which is Calcutta, is attacked. It is taken by the Bengali forces. And coming out of that in 1756, you have something called the Black Hole of Calcutta, which was an atrocity, but I'm going to say it was very overblown. It's like Remember the Alamo or Remember the Maine in American history. And in fact, when the Nawab found out about it, of Bengal, he ordered the dungeon cleared and the British prisoners released. So in that one night, yes, several died. It was subordinates who were not following orders that ordered it. But the British had made this out for 200 years after to be the greatest atrocity in the history of warfare, when in fact it wasn't. So under that pretext, Clive sails to Calcutta from Madras and makes war on the Bengalis. The Battle of Plassey in English, Plassey in Bengali, 1757 is noted as the date of the British conquest of India. If you see timelines, you usually see 1757 as the first date. And that's obviously talked about a lot in this book by Sashi Tharoor, An Era of Darkness, which there's a lot in here that's very good. There's some in here that I would dispute, actually, but that's a book worth checking out also. The Battle of Palashi is especially interesting because the first day of the battle, the Bengalis were winning. With French assistance, by the way. Clive is able to create an act of treachery, getting one of the Bengali commanders to collapse his flank and allow the British to rush in. Capture the Nawab, execute him. 10 days later, the British are now in control of Bengal. And let's remind you from the last lesson what we said about Bengal. It is the richest place on the planet at this point. This is the battle at Palashi, which is now in West Bengal in India. The first day the Bengalis were winning the battle, treachery is committed. Clive retires to contemplate, realizing their forces are getting routed. The next day they win because a Bengali commander has been bribed to collapse his flank. So the British are now in control of Bengal. The Mughal emperor, seeing this in Shah Jahanabad, in Delhi, decides he's going to confront the British in battle in 1764 in Bihar. Now, the British have never defeated the Mughals in a battle at this point, but they win this battle at Buhar in Bihar, and that whole area now is controlled by the East India Company. Now, the East India Company doesn't annex it. What they say is these are Bengal, Bihar, Orissa, which now is part of this domain too. These are all controlled by the Mughal emperor, who is effectively our prisoner. And we're collecting the taxes now for the Mughal Empire. We get our legitimacy for being the tax collector, the IRS, if you will, or whatever you want to call it, of the Mughal Empire, really the functioning government of the Mughal Empire. So their coffers are filling up. You have a lot of British people getting very rich, going back to Britain with excessive money, working class people. This bothers many in Parliament, including the very noted Edmund Burke, who is, I would say, the father of modern conservatism in the West. And Hector Munro is one of the guys accused of corruption. Another is a man called Warren Hastings, who was the Governor General of India. He is impeached, and in 1784, the East India Company, while in nominal control of Mughal-controlled lands in India, is effectively usurped by the British Crown and by Parliament, which is the beginning of a rapid escalation of what happens in India, in my opinion. The East India Company is often cast as villains. I'm not saying they were benign in their intents, but they were traders, first and foremost, with a mercenary army who had won some of these battles, but they were also very much into gaining legitimacy by acting as if they were Indian. They were taking on Indian customs, and many of them were taking on Indian wives. Many had fallen in love with, they were Indophiles. They had fallen in love with Indian culture. That would not happen from 1784 onward, when Charles Cornwallis was put in control. This man, Cornwallis, was, after his defeat at Yorktown, was put in control of British India, and he started an era of racism, which we're going to talk about next week. There was not really much racism towards Indians from the British prior to Cornwallis arriving. As I said, East India Company officials wanted to be Indian. They wanted to appear like they were just another Indian interest working with the Mughal Empire, however brutal their conquests were. 1780, Mysore in South India sorry about that. Mysore in South India was rapidly industrializing. Hyder Ali was their sultan, was their king, and he was Muslim also. He, like other Muslim leaders, owed his allegiance to the Mughal Empire. So Mysore is technically independent, but he's paying a tribute every year to the Mughal Empire. They rapidly industrialized, and by 1780, the living standard in Mysore was higher than it is in Britain. And they developed these. We think of them as Congrevian rockets, right? Rockets, red glare, Star-Spangled Banner. They were actually Mysorean rockets first used against the British at a number of battles. As Mysore held their own in South India and defeated the British in a number of battles, then the British fight back. The British are able to make alliances with other Indian kingdoms, most notably Hyderabad, to fight Mysore. And in the end, the son of Hyder Ali, 1799, Tipu Sultan is defeated and South India is conquered. This is a piece, a replica of a piece commissioned by Tipu Sultan, which is, he was the Tiger of Mysore, and this is a tiger disavowing a British soldier who happens to be Hector Munro, who we just saw a few minutes ago, Hector Munro's son. Very, very famous piece. There was a musical instrument called Tipu's Tiger that you could wind up and would play music, an object of much curiosity. Tipu Sultan is defeated in 1799. The British now have control of South India and a very wealthy province. This sort of breaks the psychology of South Indians. The defeat of Tipu is seen as a horrible time for South India. South India had never really been linked in a nation state to North India prior to this, or to Hindustan, that area. So that's the defeat of Tipu Sultan, and where we'll leave off this week. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit about the India Act of 1784 and the implementation of racism in India by the British, which very much mirrored what they had done in Ireland also. I would say Ireland was the testing ground, and once they were able to implement certain things in Ireland, they took them to India. And the 1800s, very similar in the treatment of India and Ireland from the British. I will say, prior to 1784, the British were not very racist towards Indians. They had been towards the Irish from the early 1600s onward, from James I through Cromwell, all the way through the Act of Union in 1800. But India, it didn't really start till 1784. So we'll be back next week with that. Thank you.